It was a gloomy February afternoon in London, the kind that dulled both the sky and the spirit. Inside 221 B. Baker Street, the fire crackled softly, casting flickers of light across the sitting room. Dr. Watson sat in silence, watching with unease as Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his armchair, a delicate syringe in one hand, a small bottle in the other. He prepared a dose without a word, his face calm, almost too calm. Watson spoke carefully. "You know how I feel about that." Holmes glanced at him. "Indeed, but I find the dullness of the day more numbing than anything in this vial." Watson said nothing more. He had argued before, but Holmes's mind, like his methods, was not easily swayed. Moments later, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, holding a card on a silver tray. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes sat up, suddenly alert. "A client? Excellent. Please show her in." The woman who entered was modestly dressed, her demeanor calm but reserved. She introduced herself as Miss Mary Morstan. Watson observed her closely. There was a quiet dignity in her manner and a shadow behind her eyes. "I've come to you," she said, "because I am at a loss. For 10 years, my father has been missing. He was a captain in the Indian Army. 6 years ago, I began receiving a single pearl in the mail, once each year, without any note or explanation." Holmes leaned forward, curious. "And recently?" 2 days ago, I received a letter. It told me to come here to London tonight, to learn the truth, on the condition that I bring 2 trustworthy men with me." She held out the note, written in rough block letters. Holmes read it silently. "There's danger here," he said quietly, "but also truth." He stood. "Miss Morstan, you've come to the right place. We'll accompany you tonight." The evening air was damp as Holmes, Watson, and Miss Mary Morstan stepped into a cab bound for an unknown address. The streets of London rolled by in silence, dimly lit by gas lamps that cast long, trembling shadows on the wet cobblestones. Miss Morstan held the mysterious letter tightly in her gloved hand. Watson, seated across from her, watched her with quiet admiration. Her composure under such strange circumstances impressed him deeply. The letter had been unsigned and cryptic. "Be at the 3rd pillar from the left, outside the Lyceum Theatre at 7 o'clock. If you are distrustful, bring 2 friends." Holmes, ever watchful, said little as they neared the destination. At precisely 7, a cloaked figure appeared near the appointed place. A coach waited nearby, its windows curtained. The figure gestured for them to enter. "No harm will come to you," the man said, "but the matter is delicate. Our master insists on secrecy." They stepped inside. The carriage rolled through narrow streets for nearly half an hour before stopping at a small, well-kept house in a quiet neighborhood. Inside, they were led to a warmly lit sitting room. There, pacing nervously, was a small man with bright eyes and an almost childlike face. He introduced himself as Thaddeus Sholto. "I must apologize," he began, "for the secrecy, but you are in no danger, I assure you." He turned to Miss Morstan with emotion in his voice. "You are the daughter of Captain Arthur Morstan. My father, Major Sholto, was once his closest friend. But something terrible happened in India, something involving a hidden treasure and a betrayal." Miss Morstan's eyes widened. "My father disappeared 10 years ago," she said, "and I was never told why." Thaddeus nodded solemnly. "Tonight, Miss Morstan, you shall learn everything." The room was silent for a moment as Thaddeus Sholto looked down at his trembling hands. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "My father, Major Sholto, served in India alongside Captain Arthur Morstan. During their campaign in the Andaman Islands, they discovered something incredible. He paused, then leaned in closer. A treasure. Jewels, gold, ornaments of immense value. Taken from a murdered Raja, but it was never declared. It was hidden. Holmes remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the man's every word. Thaddeus continued. There were 4 men involved in the secret. My father, Captain Morstan, and 2 Indian convicts. They made a pact, what they called the Sign of the Four. Each would share in the treasure equally, but something went wrong. Captain Morstan died, Miss Morstan said softly. Yes, Thaddeus nodded. He came to our house one night, 10 years ago, to speak with my father. They quarreled. He collapsed suddenly. Of a heart attack, my father claimed, but instead of reporting it, he panicked. He hid the body, buried it secretly. Watson's fists clenched. And the treasure? My father took it for himself. He feared the others would come for him, so he lived the rest of his life in terror. Thaddeus pointed to a wooden cabinet in the corner. It's here. At least, I believe it is. My father died before revealing the exact location. He had a guilty conscience in his final days. He tried to write a letter to Miss Morstan, but he died before finishing it. Holmes stood and walked to the cabinet. He examined it closely, then looked back. Before we open it, he said, there's one more thing. Thaddeus's voice dropped to a whisper. My brother, Bartholomew, he found something. Today, he sent word that he had located the treasure at last, but I haven't heard from him since. Holmes turned slowly. Then that is where we go next. The night was thick with mist as the carriage sped toward Pondicherry Lodge, the estate of Bartholomew Sholto, Thaddeus's twin brother and the last known person to have touched the mysterious treasure. Inside the coach, tension hung heavy. Thaddeus wrung his hands. Bartholomew was secretive, paranoid. He claimed to have found the treasure locked in a hidden chamber, but since his message, silence. Holmes said nothing, his eyes fixed out the window, scanning every shadow. They arrived at the lodge just past 9. The gates were closed, the estate quiet. Too quiet. Holmes rang the bell. No answer. He tried the gate. It was unlocked. Stay close, he whispered. They approached the front door. It was slightly ajar. Inside, the house was dark. A servant eventually emerged from the back, pale and shaking. We haven't seen Mr. Bartholomew since yesterday. His door is locked from the inside. Holmes moved quickly. He examined the hallway, the floorboards, the windows. Then he produced a thin piece of wire and picked the bedroom lock. The door swung open slowly. Watson gasped. Bartholomew Sholto was dead. His body stiff, a look of horror frozen on his face. A small dart protruded from the side of his neck. Near the open safe, the treasure chest sat, empty. Holmes stepped forward. Poison, he said softly, delivered by a blowpipe, and he was not alone. He pointed to the windowsill, muddy footprints, but not from a normal boot. A wooden leg, Holmes said. Someone climbed the wall using a rope and entered from above. Watson knelt near the body. So the treasure is gone, and this is murder. Holmes nodded. And the man with the wooden leg did not act alone. There was someone else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a torn scrap of paper left behind on the desk. On it, in jagged handwriting, was a symbol, the sign of the four. The next morning, at 221B Baker Street, Holmes was already hard at work. Maps of the city lay spread across the table. Footprints had been traced, soil samples gathered, and tobacco ash compared. Holmes moved between them like a conductor before an invisible orchestra. Watson entered, still unsettled by the night before. You didn't sleep, Holmes didn't look up. Sleep? There's a murderer at large, Watson. And a stolen treasure. The game is afoot. He held up a photograph, Bartholomew Sholto's last known image. The man died in fear, a dart laced with a plant-based toxin, native to the Andaman Islands. Fast, silent, leaves no trace unless you know what you're looking for. Watson recalled something Thaddeus had mentioned the night before. The two Indian convicts, they were part of the original pact. Holmes nodded. One is dead, the other is not, and he's not working alone. He pulled another clue from his pocket, a strand of coarse black hair found near the window. Too short for a man, too thick for a woman. It belongs to something else entirely. Watson raised an eyebrow. Something. Holmes paced the room. We are not chasing one man with a wooden leg, Watson. We are chasing two fugitives. One is a known criminal, the other, smaller, vaster, and far more vicious. Just then, a knock came at the door, a boy from the streets, one of Holmes's informants. He handed Holmes a message. Holmes read it once, then smiled. Their trail leads to the docks. They've been seen hiring a launch, a small boat. They mean to escape by water. Watson grabbed his coat. Then let's stop them. Holmes turned to him. No, Watson, this is not a chase for brute force. This is a game of shadows. Fog rolled thick along the Thames as Holmes and Watson arrived at the riverfront. The smell of tar, fish, and smoke clung to the air. The docks were alive with movement. Barges, ferries, and shadowy figures drifting between crates and ropes. Holmes questioned a dockhand who pointed to a narrow pier. They hired a steam launch, he said. Strange crew. One had a wooden leg, the other was smaller, almost like a child, but not quite. Watson shivered. Not quite. Holmes said nothing, but his eyes darkened. Back at Baker Street, Holmes summoned a boatman he trusted, Toby, a sharp-nosed bloodhound mix who had helped him before. This time, though, it was a different kind of tracker. A man named Jones, a police inspector from Scotland Yard, now roped into the case. Inspector Jones was eager but clumsy. He believed brute force and badges could solve what intuition and subtlety often could not. Holmes politely tolerated him. We'll need a fast boat, Holmes said. If they are on the river, they have the advantage. Before they could set out, another message arrived. A second body had been found. This time, in a warehouse near the river, it was a guard, throat cut, no treasure, no sign of the killers. Holmes examined the scene with a quiet calm. There's no passion in this kill, he muttered. It was necessary, efficient, a delay. He picked up a splinter from the floor. Black, oily, and curved. A piece of an oar, he said. Broken during the escape. They're rushing now. Watson stood nearby, eyes fixed on the blood-stained floor. These men, they'll kill again, won't they? Holmes replied softly. Not if we reach them first. Night fell over London, but the river never slept. Under the pale glow of gas lamps and the shifting mist, Holmes, Watson, and Inspector Jones boarded a fast police launch named Aurora. The engine hummed softly as the vessel cut through the dark waters of the Thames. Holmes stood near the bow, his coat flapping in the wind, eyes scanning the horizon. Our quarry is in a small steam launch, he said. Faster than most, but they've had a head start. We must be swift and precise. Watson, seated nearby, kept his revolver close. He was no longer a soldier, but something about this chase, this mission, stirred old instincts. Jones, for all his bluster, kept quiet. Even he knew this was not a typical arrest. They stopped occasionally to question river watchmen and dock workers. With each inquiry, Holmes pieced the puzzle together, estimating direction, speed, distance, "They're heading downriver," Holmes finally declared. "Toward the marshes, fewer patrols, fewer questions." The wind picked up. Water slapped the sides of the boat. A pale moon broke through the clouds. Then, in the distance, a shape, small, fast, moving with purpose. "There!" Holmes shouted. "Full speed!" The Aurora surged forward. Aboard the fleeing boat, the fugitives spotted them. The man with the wooden leg, Jonathan Small, grabbed the tiller. Beside him, crouched low, was a creature Watson could barely comprehend. It was short, muscular, with dark skin and wild eyes. In its hand, a blowpipe tipped with poison. "They've seen us," Jones cried. "They're trying to reach the outer bank." But Aurora was closing in. Holmes didn't flinch. "Hold steady. When we're within range, we end this." The chase was no longer a mystery. It was war on water. The two boats raced through the night, steam hissing and water churning beneath them. The Aurora roared forward, slicing the black waters with relentless force. Ahead, the fugitives' launch weaved between muddy banks and low bridges, desperate to lose them in the bends of the river. Watson stood braced near the railing, revolver in hand, heart pounding. The fleeing craft was now within sight, its lantern swaying wildly, illuminating two silhouettes: Jonathan Small at the helm, and the other, shorter, quick, almost inhuman, readying a blowpipe. Holmes shouted, "Take cover!" A soft hiss broke the air. Something sharp whistled past Watson's ear and embedded itself in the wood behind him. "A poisoned dart," Holmes muttered. "He's not bluffing." Inspector Jones fired his revolver once into the air, more to shake the enemy than to strike. The returning silence was tense. Holmes leaned toward the captain. "Cut across. Force them to the eastern bank." The Aurora surged left. The fugitives panicked, and Small pulled hard on the tiller, sending their launch skimming dangerously near a sandbank. Moments later, the boat struck shallow ground, tilted, then stopped dead. The small figure leapt out, blowpipe in hand, shrieking in rage. But before he could aim, a shot rang out. Watson fired once, striking the creature's arm. It fell to the reeds with a scream. The others jumped ashore. Holmes, Watson, and Jones disembarked quickly. Small tried to run, dragging a large satchel, but stumbled, his wooden leg snagged in the marsh. He turned, panting, defiant. "It's over," Holmes said, walking toward him. Small growled, "You'll never understand. You think this is about treasure. It's not." Jones took him into custody. The other creature, a native from the Andaman Islands, savage and silent, lay unconscious, breathing but wounded. Holmes looked down at the satchel. The treasure was finally within reach. Back at Baker Street, the treasure sat on the table. The satchel was heavy, its leather worn by years of travel and secrecy. Inspector Jones hovered nearby, eager to claim victory. Watson and Holmes stood silently as Holmes slowly unbuckled the straps. Inside, nestled in layers of cloth, were jewels of breathtaking beauty. Rubies, emeralds, pearls the size of marbles, gold coins, and ancient ornaments that glittered in the lamplight. Watson whispered, "It's real." Holmes nodded. "The Agra treasure." Jones grinned. "Enough to buy a kingdom." But something shifted in the air, a strange stillness. Holmes turned to Jonathan Small, seated quietly under guard. "You carried this all these years," Holmes said, "and yet you didn't flee with it." Small gave a dry, bitter laugh. "I never wanted it for myself. I only wanted what was promised, what we swore to share, the four of us." He leaned forward. "After the betrayal, after Major Sholto stole it and left us behind, I escaped from the Andaman Islands with the help of Tonga. We tracked Sholto to London, only to find he'd already died. But his sons had the treasure now, and they were no better. Watson asked, "Then why not take it and vanish?" Small shook his head. This treasure ruined every life it touched. It turned honor into greed, love into loss, and it never brought peace, only death. He looked directly at Miss Morstan, who had entered quietly behind them. "I never meant to hurt anyone but the thieves." Holmes closed the satchel and turned to Jones. "Let the law decide what becomes of him, but remember, he is not just a thief. He's the final voice of a broken pact." The treasure was no longer a prize. It was a curse. Jonathan Small sat in the dim light of the Baker Street parlor, wrists bound, yet strangely calm. His face, weathered and lined by sun and sea, no longer carried anger, only weariness. "I'll tell you the whole of it," he said. "You deserve to hear the truth." He leaned forward, and his voice dropped into memory. "I was a soldier stationed in India. Then came a skirmish. A cannonball shattered my leg. After that, I was no longer useful to them. I became a gatekeeper at a fortress near Agra." He paused, his eyes unfocused. "It was there I met them. 3 prisoners, men of wealth, once nobles, now condemned. They spoke of a hidden treasure, looted from a murdered Raja during the rebellion. They promised me a share if I helped them escape." He clenched his jaw. "We swore an oath, 4 of us, a sign of trust, the sign of the 4. Small described the night they fled the prison and retrieved the treasure, but they didn't get far. "We were caught, betrayed by Major Sholto and Captain Morstan, the very men sent to interrogate us. Instead of reporting the treasure, they kept it, left us to rot in prison." For years, Small waited, watched from afar. Then one day, news came. Sholto had returned to England. So Small escaped, using the help of Tonga, the islander who had once saved his life. "We came to London. I just wanted my share, my justice." Holmes interrupted gently. "But you killed." Small looked down. "Bartholomew wouldn't listen. He threatened to call the police. Tonga panicked. It wasn't supposed to go that way." Silence filled the room. "I've chased that box halfway across the world," Small said, voice hoarse. "And now that it's open, I see it for what it really is." He looked directly at Holmes. "Not treasure, just blood." The following day, Jonathan Small was escorted by Scotland Yard officers. No longer a fugitive, but a prisoner awaiting trial. Yet, even in chains, there was a strange dignity in him. Watson watched as Small passed through the threshold of Baker Street for the last time. There was no resistance, no protest. Just a man, finished with running. Inspector Jones left soon after, the treasure locked under official seal. He promised paperwork, commendations, and, of course, credit for the case. Holmes only nodded. He had never cared for applause. Later, in the quiet that followed, Watson found himself alone with Miss Mary Morstan. They sat near the fire, the light soft on her face. "So it's over," she said gently. "Yes," Watson replied. "Though I doubt anything truly ends. There will be more mysteries, more cases." Mary looked down, then smiled faintly. "And the treasure?" "Gone," he said. "Or rather, locked in a vault, soon to be divided through lawyers and courts." She shook her head. "I meant, for me. There was a moment when I thought it might be mine." Watson leaned forward. "And now?" "I don't want it," she said quietly. "Not if it cost lives. Not if it came from pain." He smiled. "I think you've gained something far more valuable." She looked up. Watson hesitated. Then he took her hand. "Mary," he said softly, "these past few days, I've seen bravery, kindness, and strength in you, not just as a client, but as a person." She didn't pull away. And for a moment, the mystery, the murder, the treasure, all faded. What remained was something simple and true. A beginning. The fog outside had begun to lift, but inside 221 B. Baker Street, the mood was still and reflective. Sherlock Holmes stood at the window, violin in hand, his gaze lost beyond the rooftops of London. He had barely spoken since Jonathan Small's departure. Watson sat nearby, notebook in his lap, watching the fire crackle low in the grate. "You've said little, Holmes," he finally offered. Holmes turned, his voice calm. "The case is concluded, the puzzle solved, but not without casualties." He rested the violin against his shoulder, drew the bow across the strings once, then paused. "I sometimes wonder, Watson, if justice is ever clean." Watson said nothing. He thought of Small's tired eyes, of Bartholomew's frozen face, of the treasure that had brought ruin to all who touched it. And then he thought of Mary Morstan. "I think," Watson said, "some good still came of it." Holmes looked at him, reading more in that sentence than was spoken aloud. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Watson smiled. "Not far, but yes. I've asked Miss Morstan to walk with me, into something quieter." Holmes nodded once. "You'll make a fine husband, Watson, though I admit I shall miss your company." Watson closed the notebook. On his final page he had written, "The sign of the four solved by Mr. Sherlock Holmes, as witnessed by Dr. John H. Watson." He rose and shook Holmes's hand. "I'll still visit," he said, "and I'll still write." Holmes gave a rare, genuine smile. "As long as the cases continue, my dear Watson, there will always be stories worth telling." And so, from a mystery of pearls and poison, a new chapter was born, not only in the annals of deduction but in the quiet hearts of those who had walked through its shadows.